Two of the most common questions that I often get asked as a plant parent is firstly, how do I transition my plants from soil over into a chunky soilless mix? And then the second question that is quickly followed up by that is, and Mel, what is your recipe for your chunky mix? What components do you use? And what does LECA and Perlite even mean? So that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. I've got 3 new plants that I've got over the last few weeks that have all come in soil, which is absolutely perfect because today you're going to repot all 3 of those plants with me, and you can watch how I transition them over from that soil into my chunky mix. I've got my new black begonia that we unboxed last week. We've got my button fern, and I've also got my new wishlist Oxalis, which, spoiler alert, it didn't go very well. Disaster might be too hard of a word. It wasn't good. And so I'll talk you through, I guess, what I'm going to do about that. And if we haven't met before, hey, I'm Mel. I'm that crazy plant lady that my friends and family say absolutely cannot stop talking about plants. And this channel is all about bringing you along on my planty journey, mistakes and all, and hopefully giving you a bucket load of tips and tricks along the way so you can build your planty collection as well. So if you enjoy this video or you get some handy tips out of it, I would really appreciate if you would like, subscribe, or comment on my video. Even just leaving something in the comments as simple as your favorite planty emoji. It means so much to my small channel. We really are having a run with our animals at the moment. So it was only last week that I was telling you about Diesel, and I'm happy to say that he has his final checkup tomorrow with the vet, and he's healing really well from both the bite and the ligament and tendon damage that he did in his hip when that happened. Our cat Ninja, I think, has been attacked by a dog, unfortunately. He sleeps inside at night time, but at 5 o'clock every morning he likes to go outside because he absolutely refuses to use the kitty litter. Just before 6, I noticed him walking through the backyard, and he was only taking a few steps, really awkward steps, sitting, taking a few more steps, sitting. So I went over to him, tried to pick him up, and he meowed, like not a normal meow, like an I'm in pain sort of meow. So I've rushed him to the emergency vet, and literally as we speak, he's having a trauma assessment done. So he's under anesthetic, and they're going to shave him and check for any other injuries and also do a number of scans on him. So I'm waiting for the call for the vet, hoping that he's going to be okay. I get so nervous when I'm repotting plants. It doesn't matter how many times I do it. The first thing I do is I've washed the roots. I try and get as much dirt as I can off without completely destroying the root system. And as you can see, even though I haven't got all of the dirt off, the plant still looks a little bit worse for wear. So I'm putting it back in a nursery pot, and I just make sure I give it a good flush over the next few waters, and eventually any remaining dirt will come off. This is perlite. Just wanting to show you how dusty perlite can be if you don't rinse it off. Perlite actually contains silica. I know here in Australia, there's been a lot of news lately about tradies getting silicosis from working with silica dust around bench tops. So I just, as an extra precaution, I always make sure that I work with it wet and washed, and also wear a mask if I'm working with it. I never work with it while it's dry and dusty. So you can see what I've done, 1/3 perlite in the bottom, and then I put the plant in, and then next comes my chunky mix. So that's my chunky mix that's going in around it. And what I do is I shake it down. So you see I shake it down in a minute. I'm just making sure to try and get rid of as many air pockets as possible. From using a lot of clear pots with my collection, I know that if you don't do that, if you don't shake it down, it does leave air pockets in there. And look, definitely don't press it down so it's hard and compact, because obviously aeration is what we're aiming for. But also you don't want to leave too many air pockets where there's nothing for the roots to hang on to either. Just clipping off a few leaves there that are a bit worse for wear after the repotting, and I'll actually just do a propagation with those. And then next thing is I'll go and I'll do that good rinse through, make sure I get all the dust away, and then I'll put it in one of these clear saucers that I get from Bunnings. They're about $1 each. I've not long changed over to foliage focus, and my plants are going really well. So I just dilute it to the instructions on the bottle, nothing special. It is spring here now, so potentially my plants would have been going well anyway, but they seem to be really loving the foliage focus. And you can see my old faithful watering can, which is just a cordial bottle, a 2-litre cordial bottle. I just always keep 2 litres made up. And the good thing I like about these saucers is see how they've got the lines, making sure that I never fill that nutrient water further than the second line, because I know that the roots are actually above that. I know that the roots aren't down in the water getting soggy. So I've got another plant here. I just thought I'd show you. This is my preferred setup. So this alocasia is in the same setup. So it's got 1/3 perlite down the bottom, and then 2/3 the chunky mix on top. Can you see the chunky mix? And then it's a different size clear saucer. And then I just like to put a little black saucer underneath. There's just such an assortment of self-watering setups that you can get online. I think that's one of the more fun things about being a plant parent. So many choices. But for me, I guess ADHD brain, I really need that visual reminder, and I've really come to rely on this visual reminder of the self-watering setup. Our house decor and colours, I found that it's a bit of a balance. So it's not the pretty cover pot that a lot of people have, but having the black and the clear sort of works for me. If I'm struggling with the plant or I'm really not sure about it, the inner pot won't be black. I'll actually have it clear, but as I get to know a plant, I do transition to the black. And so you'll see most of my plants around home are actually in this setup. And that works really well for me, but this is definitely not the only way to do it. My old faithful chunky mix has cocoa coir fiber, cocoa coir bark or orchid bark, chunky perlite, and then LECA. Let me tell you guys what each of those are, because if you're anything like I was when I very first started this journey, I had no idea what any of those were. I spent a lot of time Googling. So let me talk you through what each of those components are. So the first one, cocoa coir fiber, is basically just shredded coconut husks, similar to soft and fine like a peat moss. I really like cocoa coir fiber because it's considered a sustainable product. So actually, I really like using that in my plants. And basically the purpose of the cocoa coir fiber, I think of it as it's the replacement for soil. So it's the component that holds the moisture. So you might think, well, Mel, why don't you just use 100% cocoa coir fiber? I found it's the same problem as if you use 100% a heavy, dense soil. It's great that it's water retentive, but as it loses moisture, it sort of goes quite thick and heavy and dense as well. So I would never use 100% cocoa coir fiber with my plants. And that's where your bark and your perlite comes in. So the next thing that I said that I used was either cocoa coir bark or orchid bark. So that bigger chunks of coconut husk or tree bark. And what it's used for, why do I put that in? It adds some air pockets and some chunkiness to the mix. It keeps it a bit more light and fluffy and gives the roots some of that aeration that they crave versus having it in that really dense cocoa fiber. Probably out of every component that I have discovered, perlite has been the biggest game changer for me. I think it's my favorite additive into soil mediums. So chunky perlite is popped volcanic glass. It's a volcanic material. It boosts the drainage and keeps the mix from compacting and helping the roots to breathe. So I often say to my friends that are just starting out with their plants, if I could have soil, so if my sinuses didn't go bananas with soil, I would literally just buy a good brand of potting mix and probably 50%, well, depending on how much moisture the plant prefers, but just mixing perlite through that mix, and that can make the world of difference. You know, soil over time, it can get quite compacted and heavy and can basically suffocate the roots. Well, adding perlite to that mix will stop it from doing that. I can't speak more highly of perlite. So that's the white stuff that you can see in there. And actually, when I'm propagating plants, I use a really high percentage of perlite with a little bit of cocoa coir fiber, and I find that works really, really well for most plants. And then finally, the last component that I talked about was LECA. And I think I just like aesthetically the look of LECA. Like I actually use LECA for some of my plants that I just grow in all in hydro. So LECA stands for, I've got it here, so I always muck this up. Lightweight expanded clay aggregate. So basically they're little round clay balls and they're baked until they're porous, so aerated. They've got like holes in them so they can wick up and absorb moisture. So it adds structure, aeration, and wicks up the water gently to your mixes. So Google says it's great in semi-hydro or as a bottom layer in self-watering setup. So yeah, LECA is one of my favorites as well. I just think it makes the mix look nice when you add it to it, but also, I don't know, my mix just seems to perform so much better when it doesn't have to be a high percentage of LECA, but I do really enjoy adding LECA to the mixes. While we're on this, some of the other choices that people add is something called pumice. And I guess if you grew up at the beach as a child like I did, I was really familiar with seeing pumice wash up on the shoreline. So it's a natural volcanic rock that's porous and a little bit heavier than perlite. So some people prefer that over perlite because when you water, the perlite can come up to the surface, even the chunky stuff. It's not as bad as the less chunky stuff, but some people prefer pumice over perlite for that reason. It also improves drainage, adds air spaces, and doesn't float to the top like perlite sometimes does. Some people also like to add charcoal. I've also experimented with that, with adding charcoal to my mixes. It's a horticultural charcoal. There's a side note here from Google that says, don't use barbecue briskets. It's actually a horticultural charcoal. And basically charcoal, just like when you use it in fish filters or water filter systems, it absorbs toxins, smell, excess water, and works as a natural filter, keeping roots healthier. Certainly when I was first beginning, I was adding charcoal into my mix. I guess when I wasn't as experienced, I found that it takes a long time to wash that black. Quite a few washes required to get rid of the black. The other important thing is with your LECA, with your perlite, all of your inorganic substances, making sure that you've washed and sterilized them, I guess, before you use them. And I found that as long as I'm keeping my soil clean and in between reusing it, and just making sure that I'm washing the roots off of the soil, I'm making sure that I'm keeping the perlite and the LECA clean, I haven't had the need to add that charcoal in, but I know a lot of people prefer to add that charcoal, so that's definitely something that you can think about. Other things that some people love, I hear people talk about this all the time, and that's tree fern fiber. So tree fern fiber, similar concept to the cocoa coir fiber that I talk about. So it's fibrous strands of tree ferns. It adds texture and holds air and water, especially good for orchids and epiphytes that like grippy root environments. And then I'll just mention one more a lot of people talk about, and I have to admit it's probably the only one out of any of this that I haven't experimented with, and that's stratum. So it's a mineral-based substrate like volcanic rock blends. A lot of people call it fluvial stratum, and you'll see it used a lot in fish tanks, so people that have aquariums. It's a stable medium used in hydroponics and semi-hydro, and it helps to anchor the roots, retains nutrients, and provides a clean and airy base. And I hear a lot of plenty people have lots and lots of success with stratum, but I have to admit I haven't tried that one. I haven't really felt the need because my chunky mix seems to be working so well, but definitely thought I'd mention it to you guys in case you wanted to have a go. I'm conscious that this video might feel like I've thrown a lot of information at you. So what I've done is, just like I do with our month plant club catch-ups, I've done a bit of a summary of all of the information that I'm giving in this video today. I'll put a link down in the description, completely for free, no email needed. It's exactly the same as what I do for my plant club friends, just in my Google Drive. If you click the link, it should just pop up. Message me, of course, if you have any troubles, but I thought it might be handy after you listen to this video, because sometimes it's really difficult, particularly when you're learning. Hopefully it's that little guide that you might refer to in the future. My plant club friends definitely say they appreciate my summaries each month, because I do tend to talk a lot about plants when I get started. So I don't grow any of my indoor plants in soil at all. The only plants that you'll find for me in soil are brand new ones. So like the 3 that we're repotting in today's video. About the same time that my plant collection started increasing, when I discovered that I wasn't a complete plant parent disaster and maybe I could actually grow a few more plants, I finally managed to get into an allergy expert that I've been waiting for a long time to get into, because I was constantly suffering with sinus infections and hay fever and running eyes. And it turns out, ironically, that I am very, very allergic to microbes that grow in grass and in soil and in potting mix. And that was what is causing all the sinus infections. It's particularly bad after someone mows, if a neighbor mows or my husband mows. I just look like I've been crying all night. My eyes are running, my nose is running. It's not good. I knew that if I wanted to keep expanding my plant collection, I really needed to come up with an alternative to soil, because I just didn't want to keep living on antibiotics and antihistamines and steroids. It just wasn't going to be sustainable. And that's when I started experimenting. But there's also a number of other benefits. So it's really good for people that suffer from allergies and hay fever, just to have these inorganic substrates. It also reduces pests like fungus gnats and that sort of thing. So less pests when you've got them in these inorganic substrates. What else does it say? Google says benefits: easier watering. So reduces the risk of under or over watering, because it provides that constant moisture supply. And definitely that's one thing I found. I'm nervous repotting, because you just never know if a plant's going to have a moment when you repot. But at the same time, I really do feel blind when I have my plants in soil these days, because it's just such a visual on when a plant does or doesn't need water when you've got it in any sort of self-watering setup that has an indicator or a way of seeing the water volume. What else does it say? Plants that love moisture, like alocasia peace lilies, often do better in consistent access to water. It's not all rainbows and lollipops. There are some drawbacks, so let me share those with you as well. So nutrient management, because this is inorganic, so it doesn't contain any soil or nutrients, you need to be conscious that that needs to be added. And I guess that's why I keep referring to it as nutrient water instead of just adding water. So requires a nutrient solution. Inorganic mediums contain no organic matter to provide the plant nutrients. So they're relying on you adding whatever fertilizer or plant food you choose to use. Like for me at the moment is foliage focus, but I chop and change. I change that up. I am loving the foliage focus at the moment because the previous plant food that I was using was quite brown, and so for any of these sort of reservoirs that it would leave a brown mark. And so I was actually buying a specific hydroponic fertilizer as well to try and stop that. And so for my plants that were just in the chunky mix, they were using one fertilizer, and then the plants that had the reservoirs or that are all in hydro, they were using another. Whereas foliage focus, I'm able to use it across all of my plants, which is just so good. So it's spring now, so for spring and summer I'll probably add the nutrient water for most waters, and then I slow it back a little bit as the growing season slows off. So some other drawbacks: the medium and reservoir with the water are often heavier than for soil, so if you're wanting to hang them up. I've actually found this particular mix that I do is not that much heavier than soil. Definitely when I was using the Mabgrow, the weight difference was amazing, but this is a pretty light fluffy mix, so the weight difference I haven't found too bad, I guess. And because I'm not using bucket loads of water either, I don't find that too much of a problem. Root sensitivity. So fine, delicate root systems may be more difficult to clean and transition into semi-hydro. So for the first few weeks after I transition a plant, just making sure that I'm taking it out of its saucer and giving it that good rinse in a shower or with a hose or in the sink, and then making sure I'm just flushing out and cleaning any of that excess soil that might still be there without damaging the roots too much more. Oh, here's the vet, guys. I'll be back. So it's many hours later. The phone call from the vet was super positive. You can hear the dogs playing in the background. We are all just so relieved to have Ninja home. Looks like he's been in a cat fight. So although he's got scratches and bruises all over him and he has had to have some stitches, it looks like all the damage is superficial. So they are actually going to give him some painkillers and some antibiotics. There's no internal bleeding, which is exactly what I was worried about. So I just can't tell you how relieved I am. All right, let's have a look at the button fern. I just love the colors on the button fern. I've been really worried about this one. I have underwatered it a few times since I've had it. Look at those cute little leaves. Just adore them. So just showing you the soil that's in. I was absolutely itching to do this. Just making sure that it's going to fit. I've got the right saucer size for it. So same as what I did for the begonia, I've washed as much dirt off as I can off the roots, but without damaging too many of the roots. Obviously, if there's any old yucky looking roots, I will cut them off. But apart from that, I just rely on giving it a good flush for the next few washes. So that's the damp perlite, putting it in 1/3. You can also use LECA. There's lots of different things that you can use down the bottom. I did use Mabgrow for a little while, but I actually have found that a bit too compact. It was getting a bit dense and gluggy. And I was getting a lot of root rot issues. So I have transitioned back to doing the perlite or LECA and then my 1/3 Old Faithful chunky mix. So same thing, just putting the chunky mix in and shaking it down to try and minimize those holes. I decided to keep this in the same pot, so I checked the root size in comparison to the nursery pot that it came in, and it was fine. It still has room to grow. It's not going to be too small and it's not too spacious, and I could easily do that 1/3, 2/3 with it. So that's the final product. That's what it looks like in the end. So now I'll take it over to the hose and give it a really good rinse through, get any of that dust off before I put it in that saucer. And then same, my nutrient mix, and I just fill it up to no more than that second line. The same concept that I just showed you with my alocasia. I just find it such an easy visual setup for me. So before we go on to the Oxalis, that did not go as smoothly as the begonia and the fern did, let me just take a few minutes to nerd out, put my scientist hat on, and just give you a little bit of background into what semi-hydro and soilless growing is, and also hopefully to give you some confidence to be able to play around with these mixes as well. So let's start with what semi-hydroponics is. Of course, I Googled it because every time I tried to say this to you guys, I just used way too many words. So I'm just going to use what Google says. And Google says semi-hydroponics for houseplants uses a porous inorganic medium in a pot with a water reservoir, which provides consistent moisture and air for the roots via capillary reaction. So capillary reactions, it sucks the water up. So instead of soil, plants are potted in materials like LECA, Perlite, and mineral mixes like pon or mabgrow, for example. And then the second part of that, so you have your inorganic mediums, and then you have a water reservoir. So for my setup, the water reservoir is these little sources. So a pot or a container without drainage, which is the outer pot, and that holds the nutrient water in a separate chamber and keeps the medium constantly moist. And the third part to this is the wicking action. So the porous medium draws the water up from the reservoir towards the plant's roots through that capillary action that we just talked about, providing constant moisture and aeration. So that's my setup. But you can also buy self-watering pots that do the same thing if you're not wanting to set them up yourself, and they do aesthetically look a bit nicer than my setup for sure. The other way is to use a wicking system. So same concept, you have a cover pot and then you sit a pot inside of that has a wick made out of string, made out of microfiber cloth. So pretending that this is a cover pot that doesn't have drainage, I just wanted something clear to give you the concept. So this is the inside pot that I was talking about that has the wicking system. So the string goes up into the basket. So in here you put whatever semi-hydro mixture you're using. So whether it's LECA, Perlite, a combination, pon, mabgrow, whatever you decide to put in here. And then this pot sits inside whatever cover pot you choose. And can you guys see there? See how the wicks, if I move it around, see how the wicks go down into the water. And so basically you fill the water anywhere below this pot. So put some nutrient water in there for your plants, and it'll be the wicks that absorb the water up into your potting medium for your plants. When I first started experimenting with self-watering, this is where I started. And it was super helpful for me to get the concept of how self-watering worked. But I guess I found this sort of system a bit restrictive because you're restricted by the size of inner pots you can get, and then whatever cover pots they fit in. And that's just why I've lent towards my DIY system. Firstly, I found that the ones I was seeing anyway of this system can be a little bit more expensive to purchase, whereas the simple DIYs that I'm buying, I'm often reusing the nursery pots that the plants have already come in or that I've got in my recycled pot pile. And then those clear sources are not even $1 at Bunnings. So welcome back. It's the next day for me, but I need a few seconds for you guys. Diesel's had his final checkup for his back leg and got the all clear, thank goodness. Ninja joined him for the checkup. So yesterday was all about the emergency vet because it was a public holiday here in southeast Queensland. So our vet had a good look over him. She's given him an antibiotic injection, which makes me feel so much better. Confirmed that yes, it does look like he's had a fight with another cat, and yes, you are going to have to keep him inside for the next few days. He has been making a lot of noise about the fact that I'm officially the worst cat mum in the world and am making him stay inside. He's doing a patrol about once every half an hour where he walks around to every single door, window, louver in our house and is making a lot of noise at each of them and then giving me a not so nice glare when I'm not letting him out. The next few days are definitely going to be very interesting in this house, but it's all good news with regards to our animals and I'm just so relieved. So now that I'm back, let's go ahead and repot that Oxalis. The Oxalis was a wish list plant of mine for quite some time, if you remember. Finally got this from Facebook Marketplace and look, it is just beautiful. It came with flowers. I loved that pot that it came in. It's actually a recycled candle holder. I was going to use the candle holder as the out of cover pot and just put a nursery pot inside it. So that was the plan. However, when I took it away to wash it, first step, just like with all of my other plants, was to take the Oxalis out into the yard. So I'm lucky to have a space in my backyard, wet all of the soil and then remove it from the pot. And when I went to remove the Oxalis from the pot, the soil was pretty old. It must have been in there for a really long time. And I could tell that it was stuck. So I actually let it soak for quite some time. Like I added lots and lots of water and it was basically like, is slush the right word? I don't know. It was really slushy and I thought, great, I've let it soak. I've just added so much water. And when a plant is stuck, you sort of squeeze the pot That didn't work, of course, because it was a solid pot. So I tipped it to the side. When I'm having trouble getting a plant out, I usually put my hand in under the root system and pull it up. And when I went to pull it up, the stems actually separated from the rhizome, even though I had wet it, put my hand in underneath. The rhizome was so stuck to the bottom of the pot. I couldn't believe it. It was like there were shells in the bottom that I don't know if they were glued or just glued because the soil was there for so long, but the rhizome and roots were sort of wrapped around this shell. Oh, you guys will see, it wasn't good. So this is the rhizome and the roots. That took me a long time to get out of the pot without destroying them. So I had one little rhizome left. It was a new part of the plant that was just growing. So you saw me pick up, and you'll see it again. There's a tiny little rhizome and 2 stems that are still attached. It's the only bit of the plant that's still attached. So at this stage, I've got 3 pieces. I've got the rhizome and the roots from the big plant. I've got a tiny little new bit of the plant that's growing that is the rhizome plus the stems. And then off to the side, you can see there are just the stems. So this next bit that you're watching is me just trying to work out, okay, so how am I going to pot these up? So I thought, first of all, see how I've got the little nursery pot, and often I've got these recycled glass candle holders. They're great as the outer water reservoir, but that didn't work. It was a bit small. So this was the next size pot up that I had. It just gave the rhizome and that other little bit of the plant space. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting in my faithful chunky mix. We'll put the rhizome with the roots into that. So when I'm doing propagations, keeping that damp but not soggy, I'll put it underneath the grow light. And then also in here, you'll see that I add that little rhizome in the stems. These were actually so hard to plant because it was so floppy. Try not to damage them while I was putting those in, because that may be the only part of the plant that actually grows for me. And we'll cross our fingers, because by all accounts, according to Google, that part of the plant should regrow fine. Thank goodness. So that's just exactly the same as my other plants. Filling it up with the chunky mix, banging it down on the table, giving it a good rinse through to get the dust off. Now, for the stems. 50% of Google ChatGPT said, you've just got yourself a beautiful bunch of flowers, enjoy them while they last and then they'll die. But the other 50% said, no problems, Oxalis will regrow from the stems. So I've done what I do with all my water propagations, is I've put the stems a little bit, covered the bases with water. That's a recycled salt and pepper jar. I just love them. I find them really good propagations where you need the stems to stay upright. So fingers crossed. I thought this was a really good opportunity for you guys to see that repotting doesn't always go to plan, even though it's something that I do over and over again. I feel like I can almost do it in my sleep. Because I didn't know that plant, and I didn't know just how stuck it was. It didn't matter how careful I was, those stems just completely ripped off. And I'm getting mixed signals from the internet as to whether they will actually grow or not. Actually, if anyone out there has grown oxalis from stems, I would really like to know. Please let me know down in the comments if you've ever successfully regrown oxalis from stems. It's been a few days since I repotted, so I'll show you. They're still alive. This is that. I love them. They're just little salt and pepper shakers. I always recycle them because this just is in my propagation room, but if I want it to be decorative, I just take the label off. But even with the label on, see, I can see where the water's up to. So I put the water up to here, put the stem, can you guys see that? So the stems are in the water. There's no growth yet, obviously, it's only been a few days. And look, the flowers are starting to close up, but that would have happened anyway. And the plant is still well and truly alive. It's opening up during the day, it's closing at nighttime. So I guess I'll just keep my fingers crossed for this guy, and also hope that the rhizome and root part of the plant does regrow, because this was a wish list plant for so long. They actually have just been really challenging to find in Brisbane at the moment, and this was one that I found on Facebook, if you guys remember, a few weeks ago, and I was just delighted, absolutely delighted to get it. I couldn't wait to get it into my semi-hydro self-watering setup, because I just knew that I'd be able to look after it so much better. And I guess, look, it was disappointing, but it's a great learning curve. I'm about to find out if you can actually grow oxalis from stems. Accidents happen with plants. Worst case, even though this was definitely a wish list plant for me, I will just buy another one. But you know what? Best case, all 3. Imagine if the little shoot that was coming off the plant, imagine if it grows, because it still does have that rhizome attached, even though it's super small. The roots and that rhizome were all complete. I managed not to damage them when I was pulling them off the bottom of the pot. I might end up with 3 new Oxalis. So we just don't know. Watch this space. Whatever happens, I'll definitely keep you guys updated with this one, and we'll just see how it goes. So the big picture, what are we trying to do when we replace soil with these chunky mixes? What are we trying to do with them? So basically, you're wanting it to act like mediums that our plants grow in the wild. And that is, we're looking for things like, we want it to retain the right amount of moisture for the plant, not too much, not too little. We want it to have air pockets. The worst thing we can do is to get heavy, dense soil and put our plants in that, because basically we're just going to suffocate the roots. Roots of plants need air around them. So they need the right amount of moisture. They want nice air pockets around them. The mix also needs to retain the nutrients. So we need some nutrient holding capacity. And also, it's a nice addition to have some sort of root stabilizers in there as well. So the big picture is, we want moisture holders, mediums like your cocoa fiber and your tree fern fiber. I've got ChatGPT to do this summary for me. So I want to say moisture and nutrient holders. Then there's the air creators that are your bark, perlite, LECA, pumice, etc. My dogs have just come in to remind me. I know it's walk time. Let me finish this thing when you go for a walk. Okay. You're going to knock over my drink. Good girl, good girl. All right, give me 1 minute. I'm almost finished. Good girl. Oh, she just turned my computer off. Okay. Daisy. I know. Here comes Diesel. Watch out. Oh, goodness. I'm so distracted. Okay, so you've got your moisture and nutrient holders. We've got our air creators, cleanup crew, charcoal, which you might decide to experiment with, and then the root stabilizers, which is your LECA and your stratum. So I guess now that I've talked through that, the next step after I walk the dogs, because they are just going to keep annoying me now, I just want to talk you through how to balance those, because you're potentially, I know if I was watching this video as a beginner, I'd be like, that's great, Mel, but how do you know which percentage, like how much of each to put in? And I wish I could give you a solid, this is what I do. But I guess what I'll say to you is, my base mix is just 1/3 cocoa coir fiber, 1/3 perlite, 1/3 bark, whether that's cocoa coir bark or orchid bark, and then just a handful, a scatter of the LECA through it. No set amount. I just like throw in a few handfuls and basically just make it look pretty with the LECA. That's my standard base mix. And I use that for, well, firstly, if I don't know a plant, I start with that. And then I guess I adjust it according to their water needs. So watch how much water it's using and how quickly it's using it. So for example, my spider plants and my begonias, they are so thirsty. They're probably, out of all of my collection, the most thirsty. So for those guys, I might add a little bit more cocoa fiber into the mix, because cocoa fiber is your more water retentive part of the mix. Likewise with my ferns. So my button fern, and I've got Boston ferns. I have just got my Boston ferns in my standard baseline mix. I've got a fern, I'm just looking over in there in the bedroom. I always want to call it a maidenhair, and it's not. It's something like a rabbit's foot fern. It was gifted to me. It's got a little bit more of the cocoa fiber in it. Other plants like calatheas, for example, also consider adding that little bit more cocoa fiber. And also peace lilies. Like, did we say that? Was it this video or another video where we talked about, oh, here it is. You know, your more water loving plants do appreciate that little bit more cocoa coir. So still adding the perlite and still adding the bark and still adding the LECA, but it's all right if you go a little bit heavier on the cocoa fiber. Whereas some of my plants, I'm just having a look, my snake plants, my ZZs, my dracaenas, my philodendrons, monstera, actually particularly the philodendrons. It's really funny because people think of philodendrons as really hardy, and I definitely think of them as hardy, but I found that they were actually the most sensitive when I was trying the mab grow. They were the most likely to get soggy roots and root rot. And likewise, if I put too much cocoa fiber in the mix, they are probably the ones that are going to kick up the most fuss. Definitely for those guys, lean a bit more on the chunky side. So still putting that cocoa coir in, but adjusting more of those chunky components like the perlite, like the bark, like the LECA. Definitely the same for your succulents, your cactuses, my jungle cactuses, just giving them that extra chunky mix. And you know what? If you get it wrong, the best thing about this, super flexible. Make up the mix that you think is right for your plants, regardless of what components you're putting in. And then just watch how much water they're using. If they're using it up a bit too quickly, add a bit more of your cocoa fiber or your more water retentive components, whatever they are for you. And then if they're not using it enough, or if you see that it's sort of sitting around, so for example philodendrons, I was thinking, oh, they need a little bit more of a water retentive mix, whereas the water was just sitting around. I could tell they were getting soggy. They weren't using up the water as quickly. So I did transition them more into a chunkier mix. I really wish that I had for this plant, use this mix, and for this plant, use this mix. I wish I had that recipe for you guys, but that is absolutely not the case with plant parenting, because at the end of the day, and once again, I sound like a complete broken record, all of our houses, all of our plant collections, our climates, they are all so different. They are also unique to us. So I guess all that I can give you in this video is just the confidence to give it a go. Just a little bit of here's a baseline, here's a starting point. Use my baseline mix or any other planter YouTubers that you see. Use their mix as a baseline, as a starting point, and then tweak it to see what works for you and your own collection. There are so many other options out there to try. My sinuses are just so grateful that I've been down this journey, transitioning over to hydro and semi-hydro. Can you see my, it's probably a bit blurry in the background, but I've got an epipremnum up next to the snake plant that's in all hydro, just in a clear glass bottle. And this guy's in self-watering. And then of course, snake plants are just in my chunky mix. But having that combination, it has just made my plant parent journey so much easier. My care routines week in, week out are just so much easier, but it didn't happen overnight. Where my plant collection is now has probably been at least 3 years in the making. So don't feel rushed. Don't get frustrated with yourself. And if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about in today's video, or any planty questions really, please pop them in the comments below. I'm a small channel. I absolutely enjoy reading every single one of your comments, and I'm always looking for new planty video ideas that you guys would like to hear about. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. I've certainly enjoyed making it for you. Don't forget about the free summary down in the description below. Until my next video, guys, take care, and remember, you've totally got this.